Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thanks for stopping by. It's a holiday here tomorrow, so we'll be back on Monday. I've got to get up to Dubai over the weekend, so I'm looking forward to that. I'd like to thank His Excellency Bob Godek, the US Ambassador to Kenya, for the invitation yesterday to his residence. Thank you, Bob. It was a wonderful feast because we've got all these American franchises in town, like Domino's Pizza and Cold Stone Creamery, and it was really a lot of fun. He said many things, and he's been extremely supportive of the US-Kenya relationship, and he said the US stands with you. We are here. Our partnership is unwavering. I met many folks at the party, including His Excellency Johann Borgstam, who, while scoffing the Domino's pizza, "Damn fine pizza," he said. And I said, which Philly? And he said, "Pizza, not Philly." I made that up, but actually what he did say, which was very amusing, was that, you know, in the not too distant future, Sweden could be a province of Russia. A bit tongue-in-cheek, is very irreverent. We were chatting about the submarine sightings and what is a very bizarro, upside-down world right now. And from there we crossed the road, and I thank His Excellency Jeff Tooth, the Australian High Commissioner, for the invite yesterday to his residence. We are going to be sorry to lose him at the end of the year. He flew back at 5:30 from Juba and had some interesting insights into the situation there. Frank's Mindspeak session is going to be posted today. If you haven't read his presentation, the link is on Rich Wrap-Ups. My home thoughts, yesterday I do some work with Jaguar Land Rover, and I was up there showroom, and they got this fabulous red Jaguar F-Type. And I tweeted, I wonder who's going to drive this out of the showroom. Listening to the radio this morning, I learned that there are an estimated 5.25 trillion pieces of plastic floating in the world's oceans, weighing a total of nearly 270,000 tons, according to a new study. And it's pretty alarming when you think about it. Some of these pieces are tiny, but apparently are being ingested by the fish, and then later on we eat the very same fish. You will recall, I think it was 2 years ago, we went to Wasini Island to see the dolphins, and I couldn't take my Hannah because she was considered too little and she couldn't swim then. So I'm very much looking forward to taking her to Wasini when I get down there over Christmas, and I'll put up the link for that video when we met dolphins on the way. And I'll put up a photograph of Hannah when we were in Lewa and we were waiting for the aeroplane in that little airport of theirs. Quotes, I'm going to start with Paul Theroux. You go away for a long time and return a different person. You never come all the way back. That's from Dark Star Safari. And then connection is the triumphal cry these days. Connection has made people arrogant, impatient, hasty, and presumptuous. I don't doubt that instant communication has been good for business, even for the publishing business. But it has nothing for literature, and might even have harmed it. In many ways, connection has been disastrous. We have confused information, of which there is too much, with ideas of which there are too few. I found out much more about the world and myself by being unconnected. And then I went to Paul Ekman because I've been following the story of this torture. And I was thinking to myself, you'd be far better off and it'd be far cheaper just hiring this man. Just type him into YouTube, he's fascinating. It is easy to conceal an emotion no longer felt, much harder to conceal an emotion felt at the moment, especially if the feeling is strong. Terror is harder to conceal than worry, just as rage is harder to conceal than annoyance. The stronger the emotion, the more likely it is that some sign of it will leak, despite the liar's best attempt to conceal it. And he also says smiles are probably the most underrated facial expressions, much more complicated than most people realize. There are dozens of smiles, each differing in appearance and in the message expressed. Time chose those people battling Ebola as their persons of the year. I think that was a great choice. Very brave individuals, aren't they? I like this picture from Ola Gerin waiting for Malala in Oslo for the youngest ever winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. She quoted a John Donne stroke Quran quotation about if you damage one human being, you damage us all. No man is an island. Former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev called on Wednesday for a US-Russia summit to be convened to prevent a deep freeze in Moscow's relations with the West over the Ukraine crisis. Gorbachev, whose policy of perestroika played a role in ending the Cold War, warned of potentially dire consequences if tensions were not reduced. This is extremely dangerous, with tensions as high as they are now. We may not live through these days. Someone could lose their nerve, he wrote in a commentary. I suggest the leaders of Russia and the US think about holding a summit with a broad agenda, without preliminary conditions, he said. One needn't be afraid of losing face, that someone will gain a propaganda victory. This should all belong to the past. One needs to think about the future. Put up a photograph of him visiting the former Berlin Wall border crossing point, Checkpoint Charlie, November the 7th, 2014. And I, for one, have been caught off guard by the speed of deterioration in this situation. Time is saying that the ISIS mass beheading video took 6 hours to film and multiple takes. The jihadi group has access to expensive equipment, professional filmmakers. Islamic State of Iraq and Greater Syria, the video of the beheading of 22 Syrian soldiers took between 4 and 6 hours to film and used equipment that cost around $200,000. The video, titled Though the Unbelievers Despise It, was released on November 16 and runs for close to 16 minutes. It was choreographed to show the simultaneous beheading of the hostages by 22 ISIS executioners, as well as the murder of the US aid worker Peter Kassig. Analysts at the US-based Terrorism Research and Analysis Consortium and the UK-based Quillam Foundation discovered lighting and shadows that revealed the video was shot in multiple takes over a period of several hours. The line-up order of the killers and prisoners is switched, and in certain frames fighters chat with one another as if idly passing time between takes. Varian Khan, a researcher with TRAC, has been analyzing the video frame by frame. She says the video would have had a director, producer and editor who may even have used storyboards like conventional filmmakers. The video was likely produced using Avid technology. On August 25, 2014, I said IS and the likes of Al-Shabaab, more so IS, have proven accomplished and frightening and frightful exponents of the 21st century digital ecosystem. And what is so fascinating is that their media efforts all point west. The richest hunting ground for these new 21st century serial killers and terrorists is among the disaffected. That's whom they're recruiting in the Western world, not in the countries where they are fighting. The information age is actually a media age. This is John Pilger. The times we live in are so dangerous and so distorted in public perception that propaganda is no longer, as Edward Bernays called it, an invisible government. It is the government. It rules directly, without fear of contradiction, and its principal aim is the conquest of us, our sense of the world, our ability to separate truth from lies. The information age is actually a media age. This is Pilger. We have war by media, censorship by media, demonology by media, retribution by media, diversion by media, a surreal assembly line of obedient cliches and false assumptions. This power to create a new reality has been building for a long time. We would feed journalists factoids of sanitized intelligence, he told me, or we'd freeze them out. This inversion of reality is so pervasive that Washington's military encirclement and intimidation of Russia is not contentious. It's not even news, but suppressed behind a smear and scare campaign of the kind I grew up with during the First Cold War. The suppression of the truth about Ukraine is one of the most complete news blackouts I can remember. The biggest Western military build-up in the Caucasus and Eastern Europe since World War II is blacked out. Washington's secret aid to Kiev and its neo-Nazi brigades responsible for war crimes against the population of eastern Ukraine is blacked out. Evidence that contradicts propaganda that Russia was responsible for the shooting down of a Malaysian airliner is blacked out. And again, supposedly liberal media, the censors, citing no facts, no evidence. One journalist identified a pro-Russian leader in Ukraine as the man who shot down the airliner. This man, he wrote, was known as the Demon. He was a scary man who frightened the journalist. That was the evidence many in the Western media have worked hard to present the ethnic Russian population of Ukraine as outsiders in their own country, almost never as Ukrainians seeking a federation within Ukraine. What the Russian president has to say is of no consequence. He is a pantomime villain who can be abused with impunity. An American general who heads NATO and is straight out of Dr. Strangelove, one General Breedlove, routinely claims Russian invasions without a shred of visual evidence. His impersonation of Stanley Kubrick's General Jack D. Ripper is pitch perfect, and that really is a great movie, by the way. And that took me back to that piece I wrote in September 2012, when I said, hatred, I was quoting, hatred, jealousy, and greed, emotions rather than strategy, will set the terms of information warfare struggles. One of the defining bifurcations of the future will be the conflict between information masters and information victims. Like this photograph of pro-Russian separatists from the Chechen Death Battalion taking part in a training exercise. And then this psychologist linked to the CIA torture program says, I'm caught in some Kafka novel. I'm sure that's what his victims thought. And Fisk calls this CIA torture program designed by vicious psychopaths and sadists that ran CIA's torture centers on our behalf. And he's right. It says more about them, I think, than anything else. Euro 124.51 has got squeezed higher of late. Dollar index 88.22, bout of profit taking. Japanese yen 118.14. The yen, whilst down 30% over the past 2 years, surged 3% during the previous 3 sessions. Shinzo Abe is a shoo-in to win the election this weekend, and I think the concern is that he'll continue with the weak yen policy. Swissy 0.9667, pound 157.11. Aussie 0.8326, 2-day advance after it fell for 9 straight days through December the 9th. India rupee 62.155, South Korean won 1098.36. The won, this is the strongest level since November 17, Rial 261.60. Egyptian pound 714.93 and the South African rand 1152.05. I agree with Rick Spooner on Bloomberg, who said my most likely scenario is that the dollar correction we're seeing will be fairly shallow and won't go too much further. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. Little bit of backing and filling right now, but I think it's headed a lot higher next year. Euro dollar 3-month chart as well. That's had a little bit of a rebound, but take cognizance of comments by ECB's Prate, who says this falling oil price may push inflation below zero. Given the potency of the current oil price shock, the risk is that inflation may temporarily fall into negative territory in coming months, he said. And I wrote about this in September when I said inflation in the Eurozone, which has its nose barely above zero at 0.4%, could go negative in the next 12 months. A lot of it, I think, is that the nascent recovery in Europe was nipped in the bud because of Ukraine-related contagion. On the 13th of October, I said the conditions, and I will explain them momentarily, are optimal for a complete washout down as far as $50 a barrel. I said markets overshoot, crude oil does it big time, and every model needs to consider such a price outcome. In fact, the oil market has always been very high beta and exhibits magnified price reactions to the demand and supply dynamic. Look at the 1-year chart I'm about to put up, $61.52, that's WTI. Fell nearly 5% yesterday, biggest daily drop in almost 2 weeks, hit a 5.5-year low of $60.43 on Wednesday. Brent crude got as low as $63.56, which is the weakest since July 2009, closed down 4%. As I said again on the 13th of October, the US administration has turned price slasher, and like in Psycho, oil has been sliced up real good. And, you know, it is the US, in fact, which is the new price setter for the oil markets, and this is a deep and important geopolitical development. I said then, the new price levels will have immediate, enormous geopolitical, financial knock-on effects and place intolerable pressure on oil producers, and particularly those operating from a higher base price. And I essentially am saying that President Obama has been a subtle, skilled, hard-nosed exponent of currency and now oil warfare. This plan to undercut oil was exquisitely constructed and executed. I called it a 21st century shock and awe, without even having to fire a bullet. And indeed, if you just look at the ruble, fell another 1.5% to 54.845 yesterday, down 40% this year. Bank of Russia spent $76 billion in 2014 on currency interventions, depleting the country's reserves to a 5-year low of $420 billion. My point being, that's been a frightful cost that's been exacted. Wall Street Journal had an interesting map of winners and losers from the plunge in oil prices for almost every country. I also put up a 1-month chart. I think we're headed straight to 50. Gold, 1228.70. I like this photograph of people cutting ice blocks for the Harbin International Ice and Snow Festival from the frozen Songhua River. That's in China. Mugabe has tightened his grip. He fired his vice president and a number of ministers. Zimbabwean president tightened his grip on power, firing Vice President Joyce Mujuru. Mujuru's conduct in the discharge of her duties had become inconsistent with the expected standard, exhibiting conflict between official responsibilities and private interests. This is a consolidation of power by the president. He has made sure he is only with people whom he trusts. Grace Mugabe, of course, last week was appointed Secretary of ZANU-PF's Women's Affairs Department. Other officials fired, including Presidential Affairs Minister Didius Mutasa, Indigenization Minister Francis Nehema, Energy Minister, Labour Minister, Education Minister, Telecommunications Minister, Mashonaland East Minister, Deputy Energy Minister. Then Mugabe announced that Mnangagwa has been appointed as the deputy president, new deputy in the ruling ZANU-PF party, in a move that was widely expected after he fired his former deputy, also named former diplomat Foko as the second vice president. And the nickname for Mnangagwa is the crocodile, and Reuters have written a headline, "The crocodile surfaces in Zambia's murky political waters." And on that note, I'll put up an imprint. I took a photograph and an imprint of a crocodile one day when I was walking along the river bed in Savo East. IMF is describing the outlook in South Africa as lackluster with considerable risks. Growth is projected to slow to 1.4% in 2014, rebound only modestly to 2.1% in 2015. Risks are tilted to the downside. A sharp surge in global financial market volatility could lead to capital flow reversals and trigger a disorderly adjustment in the current account deficit, lower global growth and commodity prices. Further delays in relieving electricity constraints and more labour market disruptions are additional key risks. South African all-share edged higher yesterday. It's up 5.3809% year to date. Dollar rand 11.5214. My target is 12. Egyptian pound unchanged at that 7.15 level. Unofficial rate is around 7.65. Egyptian stock market up 38.661% in 2014, and Africa's second best after Dar es Salaam. BBC has gathered data in November which revealed that Boko Haram killed more civilians per attack than any other jihadist group. Took me back to the 22nd of April when Abu Bakr Shekau said, "We are in your city," as he addressed Goodluck Jonathan. And I couldn't wonder if you could apply that comment both to the Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram. And I said, Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab represent a risk. David Lipton of the IMF had put out a report about increasing insecurity in Africa. And I said, he didn't touch on asymmetric risks, which are Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab. And I said, this was in April. The recent bombings in Abuja and last year's attack on Westgate confirmed the potency of asymmetric risks. If you haven't watched this video of Abu Bakr Shekau that I found on The Independent, he starts by Jonathan, bring back our army, being sarcastic about bring back our girls. Then go and watch it. The link is on Rich Wrap-Ups. The headline is Jonathan, bring back our army. He is a taunter. To taunt is to reproach in a sarcastic, insulting or jeering manner, to mock, to provoke by taunts. Have a look at him, his whole body shape and everything. It's just like that. 4 people were killed when 2 female suicide bombers detonated their explosives Wednesday in the city of Kano. They've been using female suicide bombers for the last few weeks. Nigerian all-share, fresh Feb 2013 lows, down 2.21% yesterday, down 22.081% year to date. Nigeria's foreign reserves fell to $35.95 billion on December the 8th, down 19.3% from a year earlier. Reserves stood at 37.98 billion just a month ago, and I think the currency heads straight to 200. As I said on the 19th of November, they're in the eye of the storm, and essentially with very little buffers. Angola may cut funding for HIV prevention as oil prices fall. But then we learned that their sovereign wealth fund has allocated $1.6 billion to African projects looking to invest in infrastructure, and they see a significant undersupply of top-end hotels on the continent. The Ghana Stock Exchange is at 19-week highs, though it ticked lower yesterday. It's up 7.365% this year. Coming to Kenya, during the presentation I made at CAM, I showed this chart from Bloomberg, Brent crude compared with tallow oil and Africa oil. And I said if tallow oil and Africa oil were listed on the Nairobi Securities Exchange, they would be the worst performing shares at the exchange. The point I was making is that it's clearly at these prices our oil is not seriously economical or commercial. And the point I was making was that I think that we're now going to see that move over the horizon, and it has a consequence for the way we look at the economy. Kenya vies to retain leading position in East Africa. Katrina has written a number of pieces today in the FT, all excellent. She's an excellent writer. Starts by saying Kenya's capital Nairobi emerged from swamplands as a staging post on the colonial railway, as it inched up country towards Uganda more than a century ago. So it is striking that the pitfalls and hopes for Kenya's future are once again bound up with the evolution of a railway line. Talking about the 3.6 billion China financed railway, in addition to that, massive planned spending on roads, energy, ports and airports, and saying that the expectation is this will take Kenya to the next level. But this line has its detractors. There is widespread concern that the project is wildly over budget. There was no competitive tender for the China-backed plan. Some also fear Kenya is being sucked into a corruption scandal of the sort that flourished in the late 1990s, which dogs it to this day. Corruption concerns are at the highest they've been for a long time, says one senior diplomat. The impact of the cost of the project is also poorly understood. In November, the IMF was forced to extend its scheduled assessment of the country's finances after the Kenyan authorities were unable to determine the impact of the venture on the budget, debt sustainability or growth, despite committing to it more than a year earlier. There was a big elephant in the room, says a senior official familiar with the discussions between the government and the IMF, talking about a promising, diversified $53 billion economy, capitalizing on its links with the region. I call that the transit state. It's the transit state status that we're trying to deepen and expand. East African hub, country has much going for it. International airline, links Nairobi to Africa and the world. The most favorable climate and a young population with a stable liberal government relative to its neighbors. GE, McKinsey want to set up in the region. Nairobi remains the obvious choice. Regional competition, meanwhile, is heating up. Labour and energy costs are much lower in neighbouring Ethiopia and Tanzania, both of which have bigger populations. Uhuru Kenyatta has pledged to bring down energy costs and boost cheaper geothermal energy output in particular, which for the first time this year overtook hydropower. And Kenyatta saying about our regional countries, we're not actually competing against one another. We should be saying, how does the East African region compete with the rest of the world? That's the focus that some of us have, Mr. Kenyatta told the FT. In recent months, of course, he's had more time to focus on such matters. She's mentioned in the ICC. And then she's written another interesting article about the textile center, textile picking up here in Kenya. This is all to do with AGOA, a sense that Kenya has an opportunity to tap into this. But Bob says that, on the downside, my two biggest concerns remain corruption and youth employment, and saying the jury is still out on devolution. And then finally finishing up with most of the successes are in spite of government, not because of its support. It is difficult to mess up Kenya's economy. The engine is running at a fairly good pace. I'll put up an economic density map of the EAC that Frank Matzer posted on Mindspeak. And you can see that Nairobi remains the main engine. Katrina's written another very good piece about the textile industry, the apparel industry, valued at $330 million a year, but growing very, very fast. A lot of excitement in that sector, particularly now. And then she's written a piece about the dairy sector, which is also very interesting, saying that dairy is a $2 billion sector at 4% of GDP, talking about the arrival of Danone, Brookside, Abraj. Do have a look at that. That's on Rich Wrap-Ups. Al Jazeera Media have responded to the statement by the government of Kenya. I got into a Twitter conversation with Fred Matiang'i, who went on, played defense for the government on Inside Stories subsequent to that documentary coming out, and I thought he had a very tough brief, which he handled very well. Anyway, in their response, they're saying, deeply concerned by the government of Kenya's threat to bring charges against those involved in the making of Inside Kenya's Death Squad's broadcast on December the 8th. Al Jazeera urges the government not to attack journalists or to curtail freedom of speech, but instead to confront the serious allegations that its agents commit extrajudicial killings. Inside Kenya's Death Squads, produced by the network's investigative unit, features the testimony of a number of members of Kenya's counter-terrorism units. Each states that the police assassinate suspects on government orders. They claim orders come from the National Security Council, a body chaired by President Uhuru Kenyatta. Former Kenyan Prime Minister Raila Odinga said on December the 9th, in response to our investigation, "I've been in the National Security Council and I'm aware that the government has a hit squad." And I thought to myself, oh, surely he's restricted from saying that kind of thing. Quish TM tweeted, "Did Kenya have a secret detention site for the CIA?" And have a look at that. Kenya shilling is at a fresh 2011 low of 90.604. The Nairobi All Share eased back 0.76% yesterday, hit a record Thursday last week, Friday last week, Monday this week, and then has been correcting Tuesday, Wednesday, but it's still 21.17% higher year to date. NAC 20 fell back 0.73%. That's up 4.242% year to date. Mumias Sugar's senior managers misrepresented key facts to its board in an importation deal that cost the miller $1.1 billion in losses, a forensic audit shows. We know the challenges, serious governance challenges. They need to be fixed. I still haven't seen the path to fixing it yet. Samsung phone buyers can get a Barclays Bank loan. This is a story in Business Daily, and this is for the Galaxy Note 4, which really I own and is really a remarkable instrument, I must say. Fantastic. The Nairobi Securities Exchange, as I said, which had surged to a record high Thursday, Friday last week and Monday this week, this snapped that winning sequence on Tuesday. More profit taking yesterday. It's up 21.17%. We're seeing outperformance in the petro-consuming economies like Kenya versus petro-producers. Nigeria's at 22-month lows, for example. I think oil will stay lower for longer than the market expects. It will be a meaningful boost for the economy, and we'll have a lower interest rates because the government have drawn down $2.75 billion from the international markets. They need far less from the local markets. I think that will be a twin boost, lower oil price. It's very democratic. Everyone has to buy oil in some shape or form. And lower interest rates. And against that, we know the complexities that we're facing, tourism in particular, is really knocked out next year as well. But once again, thank you for stopping by. Wish you a great holiday tomorrow, and I shall return on